Greetings. Some years ago, I needed to decide which book is the written word of God. And this came about at a time when I was going to a religious corporation. And this particular religious corporation held that the King James was the book to read. And then they decided, or the leader of the religious corporation decided, to begin to use the New King James. Well, to me, I did not care one way or the other. But then as the division began to become increased, I began to look into it. And it was the first time I began to ponder which book is true. And there are many. And I began to understand that there can only be one. There can only be one written word of God. And I began to see that the 1611 King James, as it is called, translation, was that true book. So how did I come to that understanding? Well, I had to use the scriptures. How is a person to use the scriptures to prove the scriptures? Some people would call that wrong reasoning. Well, if we believe and we know the Holy Scriptures are true, then we have no trouble with that. So I began. I looked and I said, who is with the authority to bring forth the written word of God? And Moses told us, when the king is sitting upon his throne, then he can make a copy of the law. Now, this is the law for Israel. But I also began to understand that sovereignty is given to kings. So if we look at when Israel was taken off the land, what kings had the sovereignty to do things for God? Well, there was one king, Nebuchadnezzar. Jeremiah said, Nebuchadnezzar is the servant of the Lord, and that the Jews were to obey him. They were to put their neck under his yoke and go into Babylon. But there were many that did not listen to Jeremiah. So I began to ask myself, what would I have done? Would have I believed Jeremiah and went into Babylon? Or would have I been stubborn and rejected the word that was coming from Jeremiah? How was I to determine what I would do back then if I am here now? And I learned there is nothing new under the sun. What was old is new again. So now we have a king. who published the written word of God. Is that true? Did he have the authority to do such a thing? And if he did, do we believe it? Well, that question was for me. And in the end, I came to understand that what he published is true. But it was looking at Nebuchadnezzar and saying, well, Nebuchadnezzar was a heathen king. Why would Israel obey a heathen king? Well, the Hebrew prophet told them to. But the heathen king was not a good king. He was a bad man. Did evil things. That is not changing what the Lord said about Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is my servant. Jeremiah believed it, and I have determined that I believe it also. But there are many today that will not hold to this. That is their choice. Many people believe it is good to have a choice. Well, if they make the right choice. How do we know we are making the right choice? Well, what is our foundation? Well, my foundation is Jesus Christ. But we need the written word of God to tell us, who is Jesus Christ? Well, I looked and I said, he is the word. So if we reject the written word of God, we are rejecting him. That was very fearful. So now we look and we say, do we have a good king? An honorable king? We do. King Cyrus. The Lord said that Cyrus shall bring forth the temple. He shall proclaim for that temple to be built. Well, Israel loved that. Did they care whether he was a heathen king? Why would they? It was in their benefit. So now today, let us look. Who is benefiting from the written word of God? Who is benefiting from deceiving those to believe the written word of God? When we look at these two things, we begin to understand. We must believe those that we may not believe are good, and we must believe those that we know to be good. When the word of God is coming to us, whether it is from one that is seen as evil or one that is seen as good, we must know the will of God. And in the days of Israel, many of them did not, and they suffered. Today, these words that are being brought forth are to encourage those that believe the written word of God, but they have never proven what they have is the written word of God. If we look and we say, the King James, how did it begin? Well, it began with many books within the book. And even the people today that hold to the King James, they do not understand that there were books taken out that were put in the 1611. First, why are people ignorant of that? Well, they're ignorant of it because they have not been told. And when people are told, they are told, well, those books are not part of the written word of God. What authority do they have for saying the king was wrong for putting them in? Very fearful to say such a thing, because we're not to add nor take away